Primary axioms. Dianetics is a heuristic science built upon axioms. Workability rather than truth has been consulted. The only claim made for these axioms is that by their use, certain definite and predictable results can be obtained. The principal achievement of Dianetics lies in its organization. Almost any of its parts can be found somewhere in history, even when they were independently evolved by the writer. There are no principal sources, and where a practice or a principle is borrowed from some past school, the connection is usually accidental and does not admit any further use or validity of that school. Dianetics is actually a family of sciences. It is here addressed in the form of a science of thought applicable to psychosomatic ills and individual aberrations. The field of thought may be divided into two areas, which have been classified as the knowable and the unknowable. We are here concerned only with the knowable. In the unknowable, we place that data which we do not need to know in order to solve the problem of improving or curing of aberrations of the human mind. By thus splitting the broad field of thought, we need not now concern ourselves with such indefinites as spiritualism, deism, telepathy, clairvoyance, or, for instance, the human soul. Conceiving this split as a line drawn through the area, we can assign a dynamic principle of existence to all that data remaining in the knowable field. After exhaustive research, one word was selected as embracing the finite universe as a dynamic principle of existence. This word can be used as a guide or a measuring stick, and by it can be evaluated much information. It is therefore our first and our controlling axiom. The first axiom is survive. This can be seen to be the lowest common denominator of the finite universe. It embraces the conservation of energy and all forms of energy. It further delineates the purpose of that energy so far as it is now viewable by us in the knowable field. The activity of the finite universe can easily be seen to obey this axiom as though it were a command. All works and energies can be considered to be motivated by it. The various kingdoms have this as their lowest common denominator, for animals, vegetables, and minerals are all striving for survival. We do not know to what end we are surviving, and in our field of the knowable and in our choice of only the workable axioms, we do not know and have no immediate reason to ask why. All forms of energy are then surviving to some unknown end for some unknown purpose. We need only to know that they are surviving, and that as units or species, they must survive. By derivation from the first workable axiom, we come into possession of the second. In obedience to the command survive, life took on the form of a cell, which, joining with other cells, formed a colony. The cell, by procreating, expanded the colony. The colony, by procreating, formed other colonies. Colonies of different types united, and necessity, mutation, and natural selection brought about specializing, which increased the complexity of the colonies until they became an aggregation. The problems of the colonial aggregation were those of food, protection, and procreation. In various ways, a colonial aggregation of cells became a standardized unity, and any advanced colonial aggregation came into possession by necessity, mutation, and natural selection of a central control system. The purpose of the colonial aggregation was to survive. To do this, it had to have food, means of defense, protection, and means of procreation. The control center which had developed had as its primary command, survive. Its prime purpose was the food, defense, protection, and means of procreation. Thus can be stated the second workable axiom. The purpose of the mind is to solve problems relating to survival. The ultimate success of the organism, its species or life, would be at its unimaginable extreme, immortality. The final failure, in obedience to the law of survive, would be death. Between eternal survival and death lie innumerable gradations. In the middle ground of such a scale would be mere existence, without hope of much success, and without fear of failure. Below this point would lie step-by-step innumerable small errors, accidents, losses, each one of which would tend to abbreviate the chances of reaching the ultimate goal. Above this point would lie the small successes, appreciations, and triumphs, which would tend to secure the desirable goal. As an axiom, the mind can then be said to act in obedience to a central basic command, survive, to direct or manage the organism in its efforts to accomplish the ultimate goal for the individual or species or life, and to avoid for the individual or species or life any part of the final failure, which leads to the stated axiom: the mind directs the organism, the species, its symbiotes, or life, in the effort of survival. The Dianetic meaning of symbiote is extended beyond the dictionary definition, the living together of two dissimilar organisms, to mean any or all life or energy forms which are mutually dependent for survival. The atom depends on the universe on the atom. A study of the field of evolution will indicate that survival has been, will be, and is the sole test of an organism, whether the organism is treated in the form of daily activity or the life of the species. No action of the organism will be found to lie without the field of survival, for the organism is acting within its environment, upon information received or retained, and error or failure does not alter the fact that its basic impulse was motivated by survival. Another axiom may then be formulated as follows: the mind, as the central direction system of the body, poses, perceives, and resolves problems of survival, and directs or fails to direct their execution. As there are many organisms in the same species all attempting to accomplish the same end, and as there are many species, and as matter itself is attempting in one unit form or another to survive, there is necessarily conflict and contest among the individuals of the species, other species, or units of matter. Species cannot survive without being interested primarily in the species. Natural selection and other causes have established this as a primary rule for survival, that the unit remain alive as long as possible as a unit, and by association and procreation, that the species remain alive as a species. Second-grade interest is paid by the unit or the species to its symbiotes. Third-grade interest is paid to inanimate matter. As this is apparently the most workable solution, natural selection best preserves those species which follow this working rule, and the symbiotes of the successful species, therefore, have enhanced opportunity for survival. Man is the most successful organism currently in existence, at least on this planet. Man is currently winning in the perpetual cosmic election, which possibly may select the thinker of the new thought. Man is heir to the experience and construction of his own ancestors. As cellular conservatism is one of the factors of survival, his mind is basically the same mind which directed and resolved the problems of his animal forebears. By evolution and natural selection, this mind, therefore, has the primary priority in emergencies. Superimposed on this animal mind has been developed an enormously complex analyzer, which probably exists as his frontal lobe. The command survive is variable in individuals and species to the extent that it may be strong or weak. Superior strength of the command in the individual or species is normally but variably a survival factor. The primary facet of personality is the basic strength of the dynamic drive. Dynamic, the dynamic thrust into time and space of an individual, a species, or a unit of matter or energy, especially defined for the purpose of Dianetics as survive. The dynamic is variable from individual to individual and race to race. It is varied by physiology, environment, and experience. Its manifestation in the animal mind affects both the tenacity of the individual to life or purpose, and it affects the activity of the analyzer. The first characteristic of the individual which should be considered is the basic strength of his dynamic, by which an axiom can be formulated. The persistency of the individual in life is directly governed by the strength of his basic dynamic. The analytical, human, or as it has elsewhere been called erroneously, the conscious mind, is variable from individual to individual and race to race in its ability to perceive and resolve problems. Another axiom can then be formulated. Intelligence is the ability of an individual, group, or race to resolve problems relating to survival. It should be noted that there is a distinct difference between the dynamic and the intelligence. High intelligence may not denote high dynamic. High dynamic may not denote high intelligence. Intelligence is mental sensitivity and analytical ability. Dynamic is the persistency of the individual in obedience to the command, survive. It has been noted that there is a gradation in the scale of survival. Gains toward the ultimate goal are pleasurable. Failures toward the final defeat are sorrowful or painful. Pleasure is therefore the perception of well-being or an advance toward the ultimate goal. Pain, therefore, is the perception of a reduction toward the final defeat. Both are necessary survival factors. For the purpose of Dianetics, good and evil must be defined. Those things which may be classified as good by an individual are only those things which aid himself, his family, his group, his race, mankind, or life in its dynamic obedience to the command, modified by the observations of the individual, his family, his group, his race, or life. As evil may be classified those things which tend to limit the dynamic thrust of the individual, his family, his group, his race, or life in general in the dynamic drive. Also limited by the observation, the observer, and his ability to observe. Good may be defined as constructive. Evil may be defined as destructive. Definitions modified by viewpoint. The individual man is an organism attempting to survive in affinity or contest with other men, races, and the three kingdoms. His goal is survival, for himself, his progeny, his group, his race, his symbiotes, life, and the universe in general, in contest with any efforts or entities which threaten or impede his efforts to attain the goal. His happiness depends upon making, consolidating, or contemplating gains toward his goal. It is a purpose of Dianetics in general, and abnormal Dianetics in particular, to pass man across the abyss of irrational, solely reactive thought, and enter him upon a new stage of constructive progression to the ultimate goal.